Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're welcoming back a guest that we've had on our program before, Guy Finley. We're going to be talking about his new book, The Seeker, The Search, and the Sacred. Guy Finley, for more than 30 years, has been the founder and director of a nonprofit Life of Learning Foundation where he helps people try to seek freedom and enduring fulfillment. He's going to be joining us here on the program today to find out how we can kind of question those very things to see how we can find that for ourselves. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Guy Finley. Guy Finley, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, Daniel. Nice to speak with you again.
You bet. What you been up to these days?
Oh, just hanging around in a hammock.
Hanging around in a hammock. Nothing like searching for the truth while you're kind of lazing about your day, I always say, huh?
Well, things are very busy. Myself and a group of people here are working very hard to find new avenues to present these principles, to make them not only available, but hopefully interesting and digestible. So part of the project, I'm sure we'll talk about it, connected with the release of my new book, is a new website, and just lots going on.
Mm-hmm. Now, 2012 seems to be one of those big years that everybody's been talking about quite a bit, but now we're in it. And
yeah, we're there.
Yeah, we're there. And, and everybody, of course, has a lot of different ideas about what they believe is supposed to happen, ranging from Armageddon and the end of the world to an unfoldment of the spiritual reality where we kind of all come together. What has been your take, and how have you answered that question as people approach you about it?
Well, as a rule, most people know better than to approach me about it because, as you know from our prior conversations, and I believe it's evident in all of the work that I do, I'm not a prognosticator. I don't hold much truck in worrying about what tomorrow may bring. There's only one thing that all of us can be sure of, and that is that our character, who we are, and what we are aligned with in this moment is what our life will be and sows the seeds of anything that may come. So if I'm not present to myself now, practicing, if you will, this living presence, then come what may, it's not going to matter. If I'm afraid about what may take place December of this year, then I'll be afraid when the moment comes. If I'm using the fear now, I won't be afraid then either.
I remember when we, in our last discussion, there was a caller who had called in and was really concerned about how his now ex-wife was really sticking it to him. And we were trying to encourage him, look, you're still allowing her to do this. You need to move on. And, it kind of raised a thought that really occurs where people tend to be sort of slaves or enslaved by sometimes past deeds or even future events that haven't happened. And we were, as you were trying to explain to him, you need to find a way to be free from that because it's no longer happening. What are sometimes, the reasons that we tend to, I guess, to not really be in the moment, that we kind of get stuck in our past or our future?
Well, as I think most of your listeners know, to one degree or another, there are parts of us that just can't wait to throw out a hook, set it in us, and then drag us down through the dirt of some day gone by where things disappointed us or we were discouraged or someone did something. I mean, it should be evident, I don't think it is as much as it ought to be, that we have living within us a certain kind of nature that likes to dwell, whether it's on the past that somehow was punishing or connected to a future that we fear or otherwise project is going to be a punishment. We just have this part of ourselves that likes to feel what it makes us feel like to be afraid or to be upset or angry or depressed. Nothing can change really, Daniel, in our lives until we realize that if we're not, I have a saying, the unattended mind is the breeding ground of defeat. It is our unawareness that punishes us. The solution is a new kind of awareness.
I find that very fascinating to really wrap my head around.
Well, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, when we find ourselves being assaulted by, and it can be it can be a fear, it can be a new plan, a new hope for a romance. I'm moving someplace, it'll be better when I get there. Or being, like I said, dragged through the dregs of yesterday's disappointments. The fact of the matter is that in those instances, we can see pretty clearly that something in us comes up and it tries to struggle. I don't want to feel this way. I'm going to change my this. I'm going to do that. And we go out looking for what I call new powers, new ways to feel better about ourselves or more involved in life, maybe some new religious or spiritual practice that's full of promise, because we momentarily are identifying ourselves with a certain kind of power. But I say, and I think we can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt, it isn't new powers that we need, Daniel. What we have to do is stop agreeing to be powerless in those moments when we're visited by these punishing thoughts and feelings that pass themselves off as protectors or promisers of some better tomorrow.
You bring up something that reminds me of a woman. This was about 10 plus years ago, and she began going to church regularly. And there was a moment after going for about 2 or 3 months where she says, I'm going to church, but I don't feel that I'm any happier. And I just simply asked her, well, what made you think going to church would make you happier? And you talk about in your book what is known as divine dissatisfaction. It sounds
Yes.
like you're hitting on this. So kind of elaborate a little bit more on that, because I think sometimes people, they go, perhaps they're led by, they see a happiness in others because they go to a church or they find a particular religion or a path to connect with God, and they sense that there's happiness there, so they figure, well, I need that for myself. But yet sometimes somebody might arrive to that point and God just isn't there. Tell us about this divine dissatisfaction.
Well, first, to give the listeners a little context, in my new book, The Seeker, the Search, the Sacred, is actually divided up into 3 distinct sections. Each of the 3 sections has 2 parts. The 2 parts to each of these 3 sections is made up of an essay, some explanation that I go through, by which to help the reader understand the following part of that first section, which is a series of quotations carefully collected through time, literally beginning back 5, 6, 7,000 years ago, all the way through our current date, where, in the instance of the seeker, because we're talking about divine dissatisfaction, where the reader is introduced to this idea that this same unhappiness that we all experience is in fact something sown into us by the divine. And the first section of the book takes the quotations of the masters, the saints, the sages, the wise ones through time, and helps the reader see this beautiful golden thread that runs throughout all of time, wherein he or she begins to recognize, you know what? I could have written what this man or woman said 4,000 years ago or 400 years ago, because I feel this dissatisfaction too. And because of it, I am a seeker. We are all seekers. I think it's in the Quran, I think there's a quotation, birds fly, fish swim, men pray.
Right.
So we don't know, I guess, and maybe it's an important point to bring right to the surface here, that all of the things we go through in our lives, whereby which we set out trying to seek some solution to this sense of emptiness, to this sense of loneliness, that something moves us to seek an answer to our heartache. The search part of our life, as in the woman who then decides maybe church will be where I find happiness, the search aspect is that then we set out on one of a gazillion journeys of some new relationship that we believe, once realized, will bring an end to our unhappiness. The book takes the reader through this journey to where we eventually, Daniel, and I know you attest to this yourself, realize that what I'm looking for when I started seeking and then went through all of these relationships as a searcher, on a search, leads me to the discovery that what I'm looking for isn't outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
The sacred lives within me, always has. It is the father, the mother of this dissatisfaction, and it is trying to get us to awaken to the fact that if we could use our attention properly, instead of letting it be distracted and guided, if you will, by this kind of reincarnation of the next thing that's going to rock our boat, rock our world rather, make us happy, we could and do come to this new understanding of the fact that we are already a part of what we're looking for.
Do you find that sometimes people have a difficult time with that?
Oh, of course. But you see, that's all part of the education, too.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we're not saying that we don't feel or sense or intuit love in its truest form, that the God that we worship, whatever our religious affiliation may be, isn't right and true and good. What we're saying is that our capacity as a human being is limitless in its possibilities of coming into deeper and deeper degrees of communion with what already lives within us. It is our dissatisfaction with having identified with some icon, some promise of something to come. It's our ultimate realization, this thing doesn't work. It's empty. What good is a heaven to come if I'm in hell today?
Absolutely.
So
the ways
solution,
we try to find our ways from suffering. I'm remembering a story that I had heard about the Dalai Lama, and a woman was trying to find her way to build her self-esteem and wondered how a person could do that.
Yeah.
And he didn't understand, what self-esteem was all about, and so after a brief conversation with one of his people, he came to understand that, and he says, you Westerners find the most creative ways to suffer. And I thought about that from that point on, and it's amazing what a huge industry around trying to build your self-esteem, has been created. And even at that point, as I heard that, I thought, it's true when people, I can't do that, or I'd like to be a better winner, or I'd like to achieve the things that I love in life. But, I just can't right now because I suffer from low self-esteem.
Right.
You know, and so what? That doesn't mean that you're entitled to sit out of the game. Get back in there and play it and quit whining. You know? I don't know. Does that sound like I lack empathy? But you know,
no. Look, I think you're spot on there, Daniel. But the deal here is that the whole idea of self-esteem belongs to a certain level of this existence, and looking for a sense of wholeness and of love and being well with regards to our relationships in the idea of trying to feel good about myself is ludicrous. It can't work. When self-esteem is generated by the machinery of the part of us that arrives at it through measurement or comparison. In other words, if my sense of self-esteem is based on the approval of winning the approval of others, then someone's going to pop my little steam machine anytime they'd frown at me. So what we want, we need to understand that, you know, lots of us, some of us, we grew up with parents and they were kind and encouraging. We had teachers who fed the promise that we felt in our own possibilities. And so we have been given in our personality this power we call self-esteem. But I tell you that self-esteem is nothing. It's nothing compared to the discovery that anything in us that measures ourselves by the values of our society is setting us up to sink into the mud of broken expectations, of changing values. Who and what we are is not meant to be compared to anything in time, because who and what we are is actually timeless.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. The book is The Seeker, The Search, The Sacred. Our guest today, Guy Finley, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Now, we tend to always get to a point where we're searching. What is it within us that you've come to know over the time that you've been doing your work that we feel this compelling urge to search outside of ourselves when we go and we find that thing, whatever it may be? Tells us, reflect it back and look inside, because you've had that gift the whole time. Why do we feel this need to search outside?
Well, there's a couple things. First, and we'll tie this answer into what we were just talking about with this regards to self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Listener, if you want to know what real self-esteem is, you have to know what your real self is. And we don't right now. And so my book helps the reader understand that there is absolutely no such moment, it doesn't exist, in which we are inadequate to the challenge presented to us by that moment. Now, let's prove this with the question. Here's a fascinating fact. In fact, I love talking to you, Daniel, because probably your listeners are the only one who know most of what those of us who are over 50 know. There was I think the second chapter on the search, what I call the search in the book, starts with a quotation from a group called the Eurythmics. And I hope the listeners will remember, it was a song, "Everybody's searching for something." Remember that, the Eurythmics?
Right.
All right. Why is everybody searching for something? Listen to this fascinating insight. We search the way we do through relationships. Why do we search out relationships? Why is Daniel on the radio? What drew him to the radio? Why does Guy write books? Why do you love to draw or volunteer or go for walks in the woods or plant flowers? Why do you love music or pursue the arts or the sciences or carpentry? And the answer is a very simple and beautiful one. We are drawn to whatever relationship it is that we're drawn to, because it is through that relationship and that relationship alone that we are introduced to parts of ourselves that we could never know otherwise. When we fall in love with someone, it's because that person awakens in us a quality of character that we couldn't know if we weren't around that kind of person. So this is true with every relationship that we search out, that we seek ourselves through. So are you on board with me, Daniel?
I am.
Now, this gets into the beauty of it, the heart of the matter. This means, for instance, if I meet someone or I do something and I'm deeply moved by it. An example, I live here in Southern Oregon, where I live and teach, and I live on a mountain. I'm surrounded by woods, some old growth sugar pine. Now, Daniel, do you like looking at these giant old trees?
Absolutely.
Who doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do I love looking at this resplendent nature with her powerful forms? What do you think that is?
I would think because the energy of nature just allows you to reconnect at peace with yourself. That's what I feel.
That's pretty spot on. Again, I love to look at the things that I do or listen to the things that I love to listen to, because in that moment of relationship, what I am looking at or listening to is actually introducing me in that moment to a part of me that is the same thing I'm experiencing. I see a timeless sky and love it because for a moment I am reawakened to my own timelessness. I see the power of a mountain and its might. I love it because for that split second, or as long as I stand there gazing, I am standing in the might of a part of myself that a moment before I was apart from. Get it, Daniel?
Uh-huh.
Now, can we see, listeners, that this means that even though there are lots of times when I'm not standing before a mighty oak or a majestic mountain or a person or a circumstance that stirs love in me, nevertheless, those qualities are always there, just waiting for me to be reintroduced to this part of myself that is the same part of yourself that is one in all of ourselves.
Fascinating. I know that I was just thinking as you were saying that, we really all have a lot more in common than we tend to think, even though we, especially in America, we celebrate our individuality. It's something that we pride on, being the renegade or the maverick.
Yeah, right.
You even hear these expressions, self-made man, which is ridiculous. Nobody can make themselves. You need other people to get you to wherever it is you want to go. But I was actually listening.
Not to mention that something had to give you life.
But I was listening to a radio program that I tend to enjoy from time to time, and there was a man on the program. He was a guest, and he was a cynic, and basically he was a cynic against at things such as phenomenon like Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster, UFOs, and the like. And, the host was saying, well, I have this really good friend who's a former astronaut, and he had all these accreditations and that he had experienced a UFO. And he says, there's one of the things that I really have a problem with is that, because a guy maybe was a former astronaut and that he has all these accreditations and so forth, that we tend to think that when they give us a story like that, that we're just supposed to believe them. And he says, but yet there is no physical evidence to prove that his story is true. And he says, let's really take away all that for just a minute. He thinks just like a lot of us do. He eats like a lot of us do. He gets tired and goes to sleep, gets up, goes to his job each day, just like a lot of us do. and we're just supposed to buy his story because of all of these accreditations. And a lot of times I have seen, especially even in the years that I've been broadcasting this show, that because, for instance, a celebrity endorses something, oh, it must be a direction that I need to go, or because a politician says that I need to believe or move in this direction, this is true. And how, as you said in the beginning of the program, that we tend to surrender our power, especially in light of those circumstances.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, I got to make a couple important connections here. Some of it's going to be a little stunning, but that's the way it is. Number one, this is with regards to this incredible gullibility of the present condition of the human being. If I said to you, Daniel, do you believe in your head? You would say, what on earth are you talking about? I don't need to believe in my head. I have one. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
I'm saying that belief is a very fundamental and actually early stage of one's spiritual development. You're not meant to believe in God. You're not meant to believe in love, believe in kindness, believe in compassion, believe in patience. You're meant to be the living instrument of it, the living expression of it. Now, when we believe in things, as Stevie Wonder said, mm-hmm. superstition follows. And nothing is more evident than the fact that our belief is not the same as the actuality as when we encounter someone who challenges our belief. Could I challenge you? Could I say to you, you know what, Daniel, you don't have a head?
I'm remembering a book, actually, a lot of years ago, Zen on Having No Head.
Really?
And, yeah, what this guy was talking about, I can't really prove that I have a head there except for the fact that I touch it and it should be there. If I look in the mirror, there it is. But really, what proof do we have that we actually have one? But it was Zen on Having No Head. And
and the point is fairly well made. You don't have to think about whether or not you have a head, mm-hmm. because something's there. Mm-hmm. Now, listen to this. It's very empowering in the proper sense of the word. You don't have to believe in the wisdom of God. You don't have to hope in its sanctity and its power to be there for you in the moment of need. And you needn't ever think to yourself, boy, I need to believe in myself that I'm going to get through this situation. Why? Now, I really need you, Daniel, to be the advocate for the listener, and if you disagree with anything I say, I beg you to speak it.
Absolutely.
Number one, I know that you have, so this is foregone. When you've been in at least one crisis in your life, is that fair to say?
It'd be fair to say, sure.
All of us. By the way, listeners,
Those moments where you feel overwhelmed by circumstances outside of yourself.
I call a crisis a close encounter of the truthful kind. Mm-hmm. Because in the moment of a crisis, what we're meeting isn't an event that's too big for us. What we're meeting is the fact that there's something in us that doesn't understand the meaning of the event. Now, how do we know that's true? Because eventually, when we finally get the lesson in the crisis passes, and we exit that moment that we were challenged by with a new sense of self-knowledge, a new way of knowing ourselves. Why? And here's to the point of these questions. Because at some point, I realized something. I saw a truth about myself. I had an intuition, an epiphany. And in the moment of that epiphany, it wasn't that the world changed, but that suddenly the world was included in a broader understanding that I now had about myself and my relationship to the world. Is that fair to say, Daniel?
It is.
Now, how many times has that happened? Well, a lot. Now, in that moment where suddenly I have this epiphany, where this new understanding appears in my mind, the proverbial light bulb going off. True or not, Daniel, in that moment, it isn't that I was suddenly handed something that I didn't know before. I was given something that I realized I always knew the truth of that. I had just forgotten it.
That makes sense.
Right? When I see a truth, I realize, how would I know that, how would I even recognize it as being true unless I knew it as part of myself?
Right.
So in that moment where suddenly a new truth dawns in us, it means really it isn't that the truth is new, but rather our relationship to that body of truth is suddenly aligned in such a way that I see it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That means that truth has always been there in my consciousness. Yes?
Hence the relationships or friendships or encounters that we have with people that stir us, especially in negative ways.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because, to enlarge the idea, we love the idea of standing before a majestic mountain because it helps me remember this unbelievable power, this majestic state of higher being, and I can't stand there long enough, can I? But what about when I stand before someone and they're negative, and I can't stand them? Is it really them that I can't stand? Or is it something in them that's stirring something similar in me, and I'm blaming them for what I'm being shown about myself?
And we tend to do that.
Oh, tend to do it. It's our favorite pastime. When things are beautiful and positive, it's all me. But if there's pain and a problem, it's all you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
See? And that's because we don't understand the beauty of revelation. All relationship serves revelation. If we can put it together, listeners, we said that when we go out looking for relationship, it's because the relationship reveals something to us about ourselves we didn't know. That means that relationship is always the same as revelation. Revelation of what we call the good or the bad serves another purpose, and we were just talking about it. It is for me to discover that these qualities exist in consciousness. They already exist in all human beings. And the discovery of that is the beginning of the end of the fear of those parts of myself that I don't want to see. You might want to write this down, listener. It's very important. There is no such thing as a bad fact about yourself. There is no such thing as a bad fact about yourself. You learn that, and you are on the road to a new kind of freedom, where instead of resisting what life reveals to you about yourself, you will embrace the revelation because you know it comes with a lesson that will help you transcend that part of your nature that you formerly feared.
Guy, I'm reminded, and I'd love to see this episode again. It was from the original cartoon, The Flintstones. And I was a teenager, I remember, when I seen this episode. I had only seen it once, but I'm remembering Fred Flintstone is in the bathroom. He's looking at himself in the mirror, and he's obviously having a hard day. And it gets to a point where his mirror image starts talking back to him. And basically challenges him by saying, I'll bet you can't live with yourself for a day.
Yeah.
And so that he's forced to.
Yeah.
And realizes how difficult he can be sometimes.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, funny stuff. Now, Guy Finley, can you give our listeners a website where they can find out more about The Seeker, The Search, and The Sacred, and a lot of the other great books that you've written as well?
Thank you, Daniel. First, a couple things. GuyFinley.org.
Mm-hmm.
GuyFinley, one word, GuyFinley.org, Finley. If you go to GuyFinley.org, listeners, you can receive some really wonderful free gifts. Nothing to join, no nonsense. You can spend a couple years, and I'm not exaggerating, going through the free material my foundation makes available at GuyFinley.org. Now, having said that, I would love for you to visit our new website that has been created to support the release of my new book, The Seeker, The Search, The Sacred. And here's the URL where to go on the web. It's onejourney.net, and you spell One Journey, ONEJOURNEY, onejourney.net. There's a 3-minute video on the home page. I promise that if you're resonating at all with what Daniel and I are speaking about here, not only will you be moved and reminded of a kind of greatness that already resides within you, but you will want to share the video with everyone you know, and I urge you to do so. The world today is really teetering. There can be no question about it. And the root of the problem is that there is this growing fear born really of one thing and one thing only, and it's self-ignorance. Mm-hmm. Ignorance of who we really are. All of the greed we see, all of the things that are tearing families apart, the intolerance, is born out of a false sense of ourself created by having been brought into a world where we've been told who we are and what we're meant to do here. Only one thing can tell you who you really are and what you're meant to do here, and it's waiting inwardly to do that. onejourney.net. You can download a free abridged version of my new book. And another thing, Daniel, I don't know if you've been to the site, but we just launched a new phase of this website where not only can you browse a living book, thousands of quotations, cataloged in time and by the characteristic of Seeker, Search, Sacred, to browse through, and now you can add your own favorite quotation from your religious or spiritual discipline to this book online, which means that this will be a perpetual book, ceaselessly generated by the visitors to it, who continue to add their favorites to it, and hopefully it will never, ever die. So, onejourney.net, ONEJOURNEY, to see the video, and please post it to Facebook and tweet it and do all that social network business, so that we can begin sharing this around the world, the idea of this common sacred source that is the very foundation of our being.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. For the listeners out there, the book is The Seeker, The Search, The Sacred. Our guest today, Guy Finley. Thank you for joining us here on the program.
It was my pleasure, Daniel, and be well. And have you seen the video, Daniel, yet?
Not yet.
Will you go take a look at it?
Will do.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to your promise.
Okay. Thank you again, my friend.
Bye-bye.
We thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Be sure to visit GuyFinley.com, as he said.
No, GuyFinley.org.
GuyFinley.org, I'm sorry. And also visit us at our website, Beyond50Radio.com. That's the number 50. We'll have a link up there for you as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. Remember, live your day past halfway.